Welcome to the Storage at Scale competition event here today in London, and welcome to everybody online. My name is Jenny McDonald from the KTN, and my colleague Naz Rashidi is your moderator online. So if you have any questions while you're watching the presentations, please type those into the chat box and she will ask those for you at the Q&A session. Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to move on now to the main competition presentation. First is from Nick Herbert, who's going to give you an overview of the smart energy policy.
Thank you for coming today. My name is Nicky Herbert and I'm a policy advisor at the Smart Energy team within the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And that actually is my first slide. As mentioned, I'm here today to give a bit of context as to why we're launching this competition and to show how it complements the government's broader work on storage policy. So firstly, just a little background on the transition of our energy system. On the left, we have the more traditional system, very linear, unidirectional. As you can see, we have large fossil fuel-based generation, which then travels through the distribution lines to the end consumer. And then on our right, we have the energy system that's emerging today. As you can see straight away, there's a lot more components, a lot more moving parts. Generation is more dynamic, it's centralized. Also, today's consumers are becoming prosumers. They're actively managing their energy use to reduce reliance on the grid at peak times, which can also save them money. And finally, as well as storage technologies, I've touched on demand-side response there, but also interconnection and electric vehicles with vehicle-to-grid charging is also a key element. And this transition is all summarized through the 3 Ds, digitalization, decarbonisation, and delocalization. So why does the government feel that this transition is a key element? Well, research from Imperial College London and the Carbon Trust have shown that to 2050, the system-wide savings for the UK could be 17 to 40 billion pounds. This is through deferring or avoiding network investments, such as constraint management. It's a lot cheaper to put a storage system there and a lot quicker than having to put a lot of copper in the ground. Reducing the need for new build conventional generation. Reducing system operating costs, such as balancing. And maximising the use of low carbon capacity by overcoming the intermittency of renewable generation. At the bottom of this slide also, I've just put this little two-headed arrow, which shows how the Smart System and Flexibility Plan also works across both the Clean Growth Strategy, the government's programme to decarbonise and grow the UK economy, and the Industrial Strategy, the government's plan to increase the UK productivity. And this is just to try and illustrate how this area is feeding into government policy and how it's an important concept. So just a bit of policy background now and to show how our policy has developed. So since 2015, we've launched 4 papers. 3 of these papers have been jointly published with Ofgem, the independent energy regulator. And this shows how closely we're collaborating with the Ofgem and how we're working towards the same aim. The 2 papers to note here are 2016's A Call for Evidence, in which we reached out to stakeholders and asked for their feedbacks and ideas on how to maximise the benefits of this transition, and our 2017's Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which I'll cover now a bit more on the next slide. So the plan. This is the government's roadmap to this transition. It's comprised of 29 actions. Those actions are in 3 pillars, which are on the next slide. The plan was published in July 2017, where it's announced by our Secretary of State. And in last year's Green Great Britain Week, we launched a progress update that showed that we'd implemented 16 out of the 29 actions. We aim to have implemented the remaining actions by 2022. And also in our progress update, we announced the formation of 9 new actions. And I believe that this shows how the government is taking a more flexible approach. We are listening to stakeholders and we're analysing the industry and the health of it and are constantly adjusting our tactics there. So those 3 pillars that I mentioned. We have removing barriers to smart techs. This is all about ensuring a level playing field for new technologies to enter the market. And that's primarily what my sub-team works on in electricity storage. We then have smart homes and businesses. This is about incentivizing domestic and non-domestic consumers to think more smartly how they use their energy, and then to reward them for when they do. And as mentioned, that's more demand-side response, and that's through smart meters, half-hourly settlements, smart appliances, and smart tariffs. And then finally, the third column is the markets that work for flexibility. This is about working with the markets to allow new technologies to enter the markets, to allow a level playing field when they do enter there, and then for them to be properly remunerated for the services they provide. So as you can see, the common themes really of the government's approach are creating a level playing field rather than taking a subsidy approach. On this slide, it shows the division of labour between BEIS and Ofgem and which areas each organisation leads on. Although Ofgem say lead on ownership, this is in close collaboration with BEIS and vice versa for our ones. So what I'll do now is I'll just give a quick rundown of each of the 9, and then on the next slide I've pulled out 4, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about exactly what we're doing. So if we start with the actions for Ofgem, on the top left is ownership. And ownership is all about how the regulated monopolies, the distributed network operators, whether they can own and operate storage assets. And this is something Ofgem's working on, and it's all about trying to ensure a fair market. If we move down, we have connections, about ensuring that storage operators can access the network, have connections to it at a fair price and within a reasonable time. Network charging, ensuring that they pay the appropriate amount for connecting to the network. Then if we shoot to the right, to regulatory clarity. This is defining how and where within regulation storage is, and also making it clear within the licensing framework. We have innovation, what today is all about, addressing maybe a market failure in terms of financing so that new technologies can mature and then enter a market, and that's something that we built on more today. Then dropping one down, co-location with renewables, so providing clarity on if you want to co-locate with, say, a government scheme accredited renewable site. And then if we jump across to the BEIS ones, final consumption levy, similar to network charging, ensuring we're trying to work towards storage paying the appropriate amount for the connections. You may know final consumption levies more as environmental or policy levies. We have health and safety, so working to see if the current health and safety framework is robust and future-proof, given the expected increased deployment of storage. And finally, new synergies with renewables. And this is to ensure that my team works closely with the other policy teams who work on other forms of small-scale, low-carbon generation, and that we take a synergistic and coherent approach moving forwards. So, as promised, I've pulled out 4 of those, and I'll give them a little bit more detail. So, starting at the top left, we have regulatory clarity. So, in the plan, government committed to defining storage as a subset of generation in the Electricity Act 1989, when parliamentary time allows, and this is still a priority for government. Secondly, on this area, Ofgem have consulted on modifying the generation licence to explicitly include storage, and we're hoping to hear back from them within this year. Both of these actions show that following the call for evidence, the main response we got from stakeholders was that they would like clarity within regulation in as prompt manner as possible. So we feel that by doing these 2, it allows Ofgem to modify the licence without requiring primary legislation from BEIS, giving that clarity as soon as possible. Next, if we move across to the right, we have planning. So in January, we released a consultation on the planning treatment of storage co-located with renewables. This looked at 50 megawatt threshold, and that threshold is whether a plan application has to go through local planning or if it has to go through the Secretary of State, and to determine if that threshold was appropriate. And also ways to try and provide more clarity on composite projects for storage. So if you have storage at a site with wind or solar, how will that affect planning? And we're currently taking responses from that. We had a stakeholder event last week, and looking forward to seeing our response there. Next, to health and safety. So in September of last year, we launched an industry-led health and safety governance group. This is jointly administered between BEIS and the British Standard Institute. This group brought together stakeholders and collating the information currently out there, the different standards, the different guidance, perform a gap analysis to then decide whether a full British standard is needed, whether a publicly available specification is needed. It's also looking at wider areas as it moves forward, such as construction, so mis-selling or poor installation practices, and other areas such as fire safety, for example. And finally, we have synergies with renewable generation. Ofgem has published guidance on what happens if you install storage on a RO or a FITS accredited site, that's renewable obligation or feed-in tariff accredited site. That's about the metering requirements. And we also worked with the team within BEIS quite closely to ensure that storage was considered within the route to market smart export guarantee consultation that's came out and will follow on from the FITS. So I won't touch too much on innovation because Sally will cover that in a lot more detail than me. But I just wanted to include this slide here now to show that the government's approach is two-pronged. I've talked a lot today about policy because that's what I do, so that's what I like to talk about. But supporting innovation is a major part in this role. And I just included the four major funds that we have. But Sally, as I say, we'll talk more about this. So finally, I know that was a quick potted summary that covered a lot of ground. So I just wanted a few key points for you. The main key points are, I just want to emphasize, firstly, that this is a priority area for BEIS. The Smart System Flexibility Plan links closely with larger government strategies, such as the Clean Globe strategy, the industrial strategy. Secondly, I wanted to highlight how we have implemented 16 of the 29 actions, and that we aim to implement the remaining, including the additional 9 actions by 2022, and how this additional 9 actions shows an adaptive approach, I hope. And finally, I just wanted to highlight how with this event today, with other events anytime, we're always keen to listen to stakeholders, take advice, and just to engage more. And so we feel that is a good approach. Thank you.
So we won't have questions for Nick right now, but if you do have any policy ones, you'll be able to ask them at the first Q&A session. Now hand over to Sally Fenton, who's going to talk you through the competition scope.
Thank you, Jenny, and welcome to everyone here today. We're very pleased to see such a busy room, and welcome to those online as well. I'm going to do a quick overview of just the landscape, particularly perhaps to explain how the BEIS programme fits on with other programmes that you will have seen from Innovate or from the Challenge Fund. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the drivers and the objectives that we have in BEIS that we're seeking to get out of the competition. I will probably really rapidly because the real meat of the information about the competition is going to come from Chloe, so you're probably hanging on a little bit for Chloe to talk. Okay, so won't dwell very much on this. Nick has already referred to some of the policy drivers, just to broaden it out. Some of the things that drive our innovation activity. We've seen various strategies come from government over the last 18 months. So the industrial strategy, the clean growth strategy, Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which Nick talked about, and the Road to Zero. And all of those are very much pushing in the same direction, thinking about that combination of how activity in the UK can lead to our low carbon future, but also help to build growth in the UK at the same time. Part of that emphasis in terms of all these areas and the strategies, the clean growth strategy, the industrial strategy in particular, have a very specific focus and recognition that smart systems, including energy storage, is one of the key areas for activity in the UK, areas where we already have substantial capacity and capability, and where there's real scope to build on that, as I say, to help bring forward our low carbon goals and also to strengthen growth and exports from the UK. All the documents that I mentioned all also talk specifically about innovation, and the industrial strategy brought with it some additional funding through the Challenge Fund funding. So again, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a real increase on funding for innovation in the clean growth area. And a significant proportion of that is dedicated to innovation, research and development and demonstration support for smart energy systems, including energy storage. So I've included this landscape slide because a couple of people have said that they found it useful because it is a slightly confusing landscape, and we do recognise that there's lots of different bodies involved at different stages and different levels. So the white boxes along the top are all the bodies that are sort of policy, regulatory lead bodies. So we see Ofgem there, BEIS, the department that Nikki and myself and Chloe represent. We have Department for Transport, obviously with their Road to Zero policies and the push for clean transport, low carbon transport, and the devolved administration. So all bodies involved in policy making. Some of those bodies then also are involved in funding for innovation. So Ofgem runs its network innovation program and things like the Innovation Link and the Sandbox, which help to support innovation in the smart energy area. From BEIS, we have the follow down into UKRI. So BEIS is the sponsor department for UKRI. So funding for UKRI flows down from BEIS. And then I'm sure you're all very familiar with the programs, many programs that Innovate UK and the research councils run, relevant to yourselves or for university colleagues. And we can see down that UKRI strand, if you follow that down, we have Innovate UK, and then the activity below, which Jenny has spoken about a little bit. Jenny's representing the knowledge transfer networks, and the energy system catapult, also relevant to particular to this energy innovation landscape. Other bodies. So down from the BEIS strands, we have this little organisation called SICE. So that's a directorate within BEIS, and that's where Chloe and I come from. And we're the people within BEIS who hold the budgets for energy innovation. And so I'm going to move on there. So we have an energy innovation program within BEIS that we fund directly. So some of that activity is managed through Innovate, but most of it is actually led directly by ourselves within BEIS. So you will see competitions on the gov.uk website, funding competitions for generally sort of technology readiness level, sort of 4 or 5 upwards to about technology ready level 8. And we fund activities, research, development, demonstration in these 5 thematic areas. So nuclear, renewables, industry, reducing low carbon, moving to low carbon options for industry, built environment. And then the last block there shown is the smart systems. So the funding today for the storage at scale competition comes from within that £70 million budget. I'm going to gloss over that one. Already within the Smart Energy Innovation Programme, we've got a lot of competitions underway. We've run already some programmes on energy storage, and some projects we already have are still underway on cost reduction of specific components of energy storage. We have competitions running on demand side response and demand reduction. We have vehicle to grid competition, funding jointly with OLEV. Pick on a couple that are open at the moment. So we have a flexibility markets competition that is open at the moment, and that may be of interest if you have energy storage assets. We're looking for a range of assets that can be part of a flexibility exchange demonstrator. And then at the bottom, we have a couple of programs that are focused on smart meter applications, kind of making the most of smart meter data that's available, looking at energy reductions that can be pushed through from smart meter usage. And then also at the very bottom, we have a couple of international collaborations. At the moment, we have projects in place with South Korea, and we have a competition that's open at the moment called the Power Forward Challenge, which is encouraging collaborations between the UK and Canada on a very broad range of smart energy activities. So that's my really quick canter through what we're doing within BEIS in terms of energy innovation. I'm going to move on to say a few things about storage at scale specifically now. So, and the tagline, demonstrating innovative energy storage at scale. It's probably helpful to talk through the competition objectives and aims, not least because I think when you look at the competition guidance and you look at the application form and you look at the assessment criteria, you'll see that we've linking back to these competition objectives in terms of the areas that we are focusing on in our assessment. So just to go through the list, we're very much aiming this competition because of the scale of the projects, because of the relatively late stage in terms of the technology development. We recognise that these projects are not going to go ahead without a substantial level of private sector funding alongside the BEIS grant funding. So this part of the objectives for this competition explicitly is to encourage private sector investment in the UK in different types of energy storage technologies, in larger scale, longer duration energy storage technologies. Again, projects at this scale are not going to be delivered by individual organisations. They're very much going to involve collaboration and working between organisations, private sector organisations, bringing in other organisations as necessary to help to deliver the project. A real focus for this is we've had, again, over the years, a lot of discussion with organisations and with companies, and from the modelling that we've seen done on energy storage technologies, the fact that there's something about the getting it to a certain scale before you can really achieve those cost economies, some of the technologies that we're looking at here. So a focus for this is kind of taking that to the proof scale, to saying, okay, it makes sense. We can see from the calculations, from the modelling, that it does make sense to say we will get those economies of scale at scale, but now we want to see those cost savings put into action, as it were, through the bigger demonstration projects. Demonstrating the commercial viability of the technology. So this is probably very closely linked to our expectation that we want to bring in private sector funding to help support these projects, and also this demonstration that the economies of scale are getting the cost savings that we expect, and taking that technology, helping to de-risk the technology, getting it to the point where it's ready to really be taken forward to commercial scale. The demonstrators, part of the point of actually doing demonstrators is to give data about the likely extent and potential for deployment, and about how these sorts of energy storage, large-scale energy storage systems can really impact on the UK energy system. So how getting information from those demonstrators that's going to give us very specific information to help inform policy decisions in the future for the UK, to help think about the role of energy storage in the UK in the future. Again, we hope that, perhaps back to the markets point, we're hoping that the demonstrators will help the project teams involved to give them better access to new investors, new markets here and overseas in the future, and that the work on the project is going to help to secure employment or training in this particular area of low carbon energy. So I'm not going to go through and the individual eligibility criteria. They are set out in the application form. If people have particular questions about the eligibility criteria, we can look at those in the Q&A, or if you have very specific questions about your eligibility, about a project that you're thinking about, then that may be something to bring to us in one of the 10-minute one-to-one discussions that Jenny has spoken about, and which you can register for downstairs. But just to give an overview of the competition, which has helped to shape some of those eligibility criteria that we have in place. We have £20 million of grant funding available. So there will be a significant amount of match funding required to meet the state aid obligations, and also just to get the projects off the ground. We have stated that we expect to fund up to 3 demonstration projects. That is an aim, that we fund up to 3. We do not have to fund 3, so so you don't have to think you're automatically dividing that 20 million by 3. We have quite a lot of flexibility within that, as long as we're within the state aid regulations in terms of the numbers of projects that we are taking forwards. You'll have seen in the competition guidance that we're talking about electricity, energy storage, and also power to gas. So we will be keen to take forward at least 1 project in those 2 different categories. In terms of the technology readiness level, say because we're looking at these larger scale demonstrator projects, and because of the timing constraints, the technology readiness level at the start of the project for these technologies is going to be relatively high. We've said around TRL 6 from the start, and then they would move up to around TRL 8 through the duration of the project. We have a hard deadline of March 21 when we have to have got our funding out through the door at that point. So that is our funding deadline for all that energy innovation programme that I talked about earlier, that £505 million funding programme that we have in Bays at the moment. The end of March 2021 is the deadline for use of that funding, and then it all goes back to Treasury. So we have to get it out through the door by that deadline. It is a hard deadline for us. We have got a little bit of leeway in terms of work that we can do beyond March 2021. So because there is match funding here, because you will be bringing in private sector funding to these projects, although our funding cannot go out of the door after March 2021, we think that there is still activity that can be funded by part of your match funding. So you'll be able to sort of effectively hold back part of your match funding and use that to take forward final stages of operational testing and sort of testing programme through to the end of December 2021. I'm going to go through this. Quite a few bits I've talked about already, so actually I think I'm going to move on from there. So in terms of technologies, these are just examples. Please don't think that we are limited to these. These are just examples of different technologies. And also just to remind you, we have put in indicative power or capacity levels for electrical energy storage, and an indicative input power level for power to gas storage. Again, these are indicative. It gives you an idea that the fact that we're looking for larger scale, we're looking for longer duration, but we recognise that different technologies and different projects may be looking at different ways where they'll get income from their system. So you will have different ideas about where that income could come from, where the best commercial opportunities lie for your system. So again, we're fairly flexible on that. So a last slide from me on deliverables. Hopefully fairly self-evident. The main deliverable here is to have an demonstration, a facility of energy storage technology on a particular site, able to demonstrate the provision of energy storage services to the UK energy system. To give us information to inform benefits for the UK energy system. We'll be looking for reporting, information report to ourselves. We'll be looking at reporting that's made public, so we understand that there's information that you will want to keep commercially sensitive, but there will be some reporting requirements in terms of disseminating knowledge from the project, in terms of talking about the project progress as we go through, as well as reporting at the end of the project. And then, I say, thinking about, we will ask project teams, particularly as they come towards, we ask you about in the application stage, but then during the project and as you come towards the end of the project, we will ask you to think about and to put in some activity to think about taking the project forwards, taking the technology forward, so that pathway through to commercialisation. Okay. I'm going to stop talking there. I've realised I've rattled through fairly quickly. I think we have a pause there for Q&A on the scope and the eligibility. Chloe's going to join me to answer questions as well. Chloe is the programme lead for this particular from BAYS. We are going to try and keep the questions at this stage focused on sort of broader aims and eligibility, rather than getting into the detailed application process or assessment criteria.
So, any questions for Sally and Chloe?
Sorry, I'm Sam Bottle. Can you just say a bit more about you mentioned something about pumped heat. Is it possible to define that in more detail at this stage, or is that?
I think for all the technologies, we'd very much be, as I said, we've kind of kept the door open. It's worth saying that for the electrical energy storage, it is electricity in, electricity out. But kind of what you do in the middle, up to you. Yes.
Okay, my name is Joss Newbury from OPS Time. Probably a question that everyone's got in their minds is how much storage and when? Do you have any data?
In the competition, for the competition, or for thinking about going forwards in the future?
Well, I'm planning over the next 30 years, really.
Right, okay. I'm definitely going to plead the Fifth Amendment on that one and not answer that one. I could hand over to my policy colleague, but I think you'll get the same reply from him at the moment. Yes, from that. We
do
don't
we have no targets
specific
at all,
targets for storage.
So the government's policy approach on this is we haven't set an amount of storage in terms of a target. There's the National Grid's future energy scenarios, which predict, I think it's 30 to 50 megawatts of storage. But gigawatts, sorry. But yeah, as the government's policy, we don't actually have a target, a clear target in terms.
Bill Ireland from Logan Energy. Just coming back on the electrical storage, if you are storing and then putting into transport to generate electricity, does that fall under the 50 megawatt hours that you had up on the screen? Because that is electricity to gas, potentially to electricity. Will that count?
Oh, right, okay. So in the power to gas systems, we've left it open. So if it's a power to gas system, having said electricity to storage to electricity, that's for electricity energy storage. If you're a power to gas system, you're starting with electricity, you're transforming to, actually we started, it's power to X rather than even gas. Let me specify that could be liquid rather than gas. And then the application for that chemical product, we have left that open. So if it was for a transport use or for a heating use, then that would be eligible.
Please use the microphone.
Yeah, what I'm saying is if you are putting grid electricity into power to storage, storing electricity in a form, chemical form, and then you're putting it back to electricity to use in transport, does that fall under the 50 megawatt hours?
Okay, I see, I understand. So I think there, the question would be, that we'd be looking at would be more in terms of thinking about how the benefit would be to the overall energy system. And you could, I could see you could make a case there in terms of showing sort of overall balancing within the system. And it's, yes, that would be eligible. I think that would fall within our eligibility criteria. I think it just might be a little bit more difficult to explain the case of the energy system benefits, but yeah, definitely, yes, within eligibility.
I'm Xiangxi Wen from JJ Energy. My question is, if we use surplus electricity to charge the thermal energy storage and then provide the heat, is that in the scope or not?
Unless you're turning it back to electricity at the end, it's not. If it's just going into heat, no, not for this particular competition.
You mean if that's just the heat supply, that's not eligible. But if we turn the heat back to the electricity,
yes,
that's in the first
so
category.
you'll see that we're
Okay.
not actually driving this particular competition focused on thermal storage and sort of particular heat-specific applications for the energy storage. So something that we are keeping in mind and we'll be looking at in the future for needs there.
Herbert Pierre Aluminium. Just to clarify on that, if the output is or could be electricity plus heat, would that still qualify then? A flexible.
I think that would, yes. I think we'd come back to looking at overall system benefits. So, yeah.
Okay.
I should say where we've given answers where I've said I think rather than definite, we will take some of those points away and we will be issuing a clarification document after today's event to follow up on those points.
Okay, we have some questions on the webcast now.
So Aaron White from Energy Vault, which is a gravity-based mechanical, they offer a gravity-based mechanical solution, is asking a question. So they don't have, they currently don't have a UK presence. So they want to know on the time of the award, do they need to have an establishment in the UK, or is it required at the project commencement time?
Okay, so we need to have a UK entity to whom we can, a UK registered entity to whom we can make out grants and include within the grant process. So at the point of awards, there needs to be a UK entity that we can work with. That may not be the case at the point of application, but we need to then have a sort of clear declarations, indications, understanding that that is the intention, and there is a clear intention to get that in place as soon as possible.
Okay, so not necessary at the time of the application, but for the time of
It
the
would be
award.
needed for the time of awards, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Hi, Jenny Garcia, Highview Power. Am I right to assume that the maximum amount given per project is of 15 million euros based on EU state aid rules?
We'll let Chloe answer this because we've had a bit of internal discussion and with our state aid team.
I am actually going to cover this again in more detail in the next slide, but just to cover this here. So that's 15 million euros per undertaking per project. So that's per project partner. You can get up to 15 million euros, and that's in compliance with the GBA state aid rules under Article 25. Yes. Does that clarify things? I'll be talking about it again.
Yeah,
a bit
that's
further.
fine. I've got another question, but yeah. So it's about project costs. I mean, in the application, we have to provide obviously a cost, an estimate, and that will be indicative costs, for example, for a Highview Power. But then later on in the project, if it goes through, we will get more firm costs. So I was just wondering, when it comes to project costs, giving it a margin, is there any rules for that? If, for example, we can ask for more money based on that difference, that mismatch that we might have, and based on estimates and costs that we get later on.
Again, not that this is going to be terribly helpful, we recognise that these are big projects. You are going to be putting in indicative costs in the application. We would, getting further funding later down the line is much more difficult, not least because we're coming very close to the end of programmes. We're going to just hit funding budget limits. So please don't go in thinking that you will get further funding down the line. So we do recognise that they're going to be indicative costs at this stage. We would definitely encourage you to think about your contingencies at this stage and to include that in your costings when you come in. So the grants are always given on an up to basis. So we would rather have an upper limit at this point and then not use all the grant. It's an easier to manage process for us. And I guess the other thing to say is that within the project assessment, one of the assessment criteria is looking at project funding. So we will be looking at the robustness of costs, and if there are concerns that costs are not realistic or not dealing with the potential risks, that's something to bear in mind as well.
Tony Wascuddy, Newcastle University. Does the storage have to be demonstrated on a single site, or can it be multiple smaller scale systems so the holistic thing is at the scale that you need? And secondly, is there any restriction on the private investment in terms of the country of origin?
I'll answer the second one first because that's easier. We don't have restrictions on country of origin for the funding. The first one, we are encouraging more focus on a larger scale single site facility. Kind of hesitating here. I think that's going to be one of my think answers at the moment, and we'll come back with a kind of more clear-cut statement. Because I recognise there's a differentiation between having one very large, a few fairly large, but what we don't want is lots and lots of distributed storage. That's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at things that are being tested, the technology itself that's being tested at a significant scale, order of magnitude more than we've seen already.
So any last questions on the scope?
It's in relation to Power to X. Is there going to be any linkage between the actual use of the X in terms of its efficiency or whatever? I mean, you can convert power to hydrogen, but if you can't use it effectively, then there's not much point.
There, I think it would come back to us looking at within the assessment process in terms of your overall business models and commercial models. So yeah, we need to see that there are commercial pathways here out of it. So we would expect to see from the Power to X competition a clear expression of how you're going to use it and how that's going to make the overall system viable.
And 2 questions on the webcast.
Matthew Spencer-Smith from PowerSonic, they ask a question about energy storage solutions. So they ask, what are the restrictions on battery technology, or are you looking specifically at other technologies apart from batteries?
So the restrictions are that we don't want we're not looking for projects that are using technologies that have been widely commercially exploited. So that takes out quite a lot of battery technologies and takes out conventional pumped hydro storage. If you're looking at other batteries, so let me think of different areas. So flow battery technologies would be in scope. I think other battery technologies, it's going to be a little bit of a fuzzy line, but if they're very closely linked to existing chemistries, then we probably say actually that's not a sufficiently different to what we've seen already commercially or widely demonstrated. And also, I think then when we start to think about perhaps more novel chemistries, actually our concern then would probably be more in terms of the technology readiness level.
Okay, another question. Gustav Olfender from Salt X Technology. So they ask, we have a thermochemical storage charged with power, can deliver heat and electricity. Are we under Power to X, or what size of a storage is needed?
So I think that probably links to one of the earlier questions we had where that would be electrical energy storage. We'd again, it's going to be a little bit of my think answers, because I guess what we don't want people is sort of skewing it into a thermal storage technology with a very little bit of electricity. So there's going to be a little bit of a fuzzy line there in terms of a bit of judgment required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I'm just sort of, I suppose, thinking out a little bit aloud here. So it's Bill Edrich from Sunamp. Could you have heat, that's high temperature heat, process heat, going to thermal store and then generating electricity? Would that classify as being eligible?
So at the moment, we're saying electricity in, electricity out.
But could you have heat in, electricity out?
No.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Sally.
Thank you.
And we'll now hand over to Chloe Lianos, who's going to talk through the actual application process and some of the questions we had on cost as well.
Hi, so I'm Chloe Lianos. I am the Storage at Scale Programme Manager, who I sit within Sally's team in BEIS and the Smart Energy Innovation team. Just to remind us again, the reason we're here is that we're going to tie into the objectives that Nick Herbert discussed about the BEIS and the government policy strategy of decarbonisation, and how we've identified that storage is a key aspect of this. And we've seen this in many studies, such as future energy scenario study, which states that storage is a big asset that we need to focus on. And the reason for this project in particular is that we are aware of certain limitations around scale and duration for traditional energy storage products, which are currently dominant in the landscape. And we want to explore further based off the feasibility studies that we undertook at the end of 2 years ago, and they completed last year. So apologies, this may cover some of the things that we've just discussed in the Q&A, but I think it's better to repeat rather than leave them ambiguous and up in the air. So let's look at a quick overview. This is showing the stages. I'm going to drill down in the dates a bit further, but this is just a nice snapshot of what we're doing. So first of all, we have the competition launch, which covers the information day. This is here where we are now. Also, we have the opportunity for any clarification questions, not just here. You are able to submit clarification questions up until the 3rd of April. Again, these dates will be put up for further information. We will publish all the clarification questions, the answers to it, by the 12th of April. For the resources that have come out of today, we aim to publish them by the 25th of March. So there's also the requirement for registration. You are required to register by the 17th of April to ensure that your application is considered. Then you move into the competition close, the 26th of April, where we require you to submit a proposal. And then that's when we move into the assessment period, where we go through the standard eligibility checks, the application marking, interviews, and a moderation. And then we will notify all project teams, despite the outcome. Then we'll issue a grant offer letter. However, to get to that stage, there will be a period of due diligence and plan refinement. And then that leads us to project delivery, where we have the build completion by March 2021 and the operational testing completion. If it hasn't been completed by March 2021, you have up until December 2021. So as I said, go through a bit further depth of the dates. Please note that these dates change. These are intentional dates. So we have the launch, the information day, and the clarification questions. Please, the dates which are in bold here, these are hard deadlines. We will not be able to accept any questions after the 3rd of April at 5 p.m. This also goes for the application. You need to register by the 17th of April by 5 p.m. and submit your proposal by the 26th of April, 5 p.m. For all of these communications, you should use the email address found on the bottom there, smart.innovation@beis.gov.uk, where we'll be fielding questions. The assessments, as I said, there will be a period of eligibility checking, and then if you're successful in that, pass through to the assessment period. This will take place over the 29th of April up until the 4th of June. A note for your own diaries is the interview window. This can occur between the 30th of April and the 21st of May. So this is a period that we may ask you to come in and hold some interviews if successful through the eligibility check. We'll have a final moderation and we'll notify the outcome by June 2019. We also aim to provide all feedback within 2 months. If successful, there will then be a period of due diligence and with the aim for the agreement to be awarded and the project started by July 2019, so this July. And there again are the deadlines of the 31st of March 2021 and the 31st of December 2021. As Sally mentioned, all grant funding needs to be out of the door by the end of March 2021. However, you can hold back your match funding to complete the operational testing up until December 2021. And there will be project evaluation throughout the whole programme up until March 2022 to ensure that we're meeting the policies and the objectives that we've stated previously. So we talked about the timeline you actually need to submit. Again, there's the deadline, just to emphasise that. So in the bundle that you send to smart.innovation@bays.gov.uk, you're required to submit the application form, which can be found at our Storage at Scale website, .gov.uk link just down there. The finance form, which is a pricing schedule, a costing schedule. The signed declarations and reason for exclusion forms, these are all found again in the competition guidance and the application form online. We're also looking for a high-level project Gantt chart or a similar project plan. This is related to one of our assessment criteria where we look at project delivery and the feasibility. We also request a business plan and financial model or something similar, whatever your organisation uses. Again, this is tied to our assessment criteria, not just of the project delivery and the reliability and feasibility there, but also the project financing side that does hold significant weight in our assessment. And that ties back into the objectives that we've discussed previously today. And then finally, we look for the completed past 3 years financial statements. And if this isn't possible due to the nature of the project team, we would require letters of support, other letters of support. Also, when you submit these, please use your application reference. You will be given this during your registration. When you send the registration email, I will issue an application reference, which then you can use to monitor all comms and submissions. So quickly going to the slightly technical side of this submission, we, as I said, would like these through email. They need to be in the form of PDF, and apart from the finance schedule, that's the pricing schedule finance form, that needs to be in .xls file. And we cannot receive emails which are larger than 10 megabytes. If it's reaching the 10 megabytes threshold, please split that email up so that we make sure that we do receive your full proposal. I should note here that multiple applications are welcome. Project teams are able to submit multiple applications for different energy solutions. You cannot put in a proposal energy storage technology with a slight difference in it. It has to be for a different energy storage technology. And we will assess the capability for that team to deliver the multiple projects if all projects are successful. And I must iterate here that submission costs will not be covered by BEIS. Any costs or expenses incurred in drawing up this proposal will not be reimbursed by BEIS. We've touched on consortiums, and actually today, our whole purpose of today is to help people network and meet each other within the field. Consortiums are welcome to apply. You don't need to be a consortium to apply, though. Don't worry about that. You can be a sole entity too. But to cover the instance of consortiums, we only require one submission for a whole consortium. And this should be submitted by the project lead. This is the team coordinator, the project coordinator. The project coordinator must be a registered private sector company in the UK upon proposal submission. All consortium partners are required to sign the application form, but it's only one application for one consortium. We will need to see a signed consortium agreement as well to be able to release funding. If you have any changes, as we know, things do change during the application process, during the project itself, during the due diligence period to your consortium, please submit these changes to BEIS for approval, and we'll talk to you and discuss how these impact your proposal. So, oh, and I should mention, yes, the project coordinator in this instance, if you are successful, would be the recipient of the grant offer letter and would be the entity for issuing funds out to the rest of the consortium members. On to the next. So what is the funding actually? How are we issuing this funding? This funding is a direct grant issued under Article 25 of the EU General Block Exemption Regulations. Article 25 is specifically for research and development projects, and this project specifically looks at experimental development. I encourage you to go read the GBA, thrilling document that it is, for the definitions there. But to cover for clarity, I'll quickly explain what is meant by experimental development. The experimental development is the acquiring, combining, shaping, and using of the existing scientific, technological, business, and other knowledge and skills with the aim to develop new and/or improved products, processes, or services. This includes prototyping, demonstrating, piloting, testing, and validation in environments representative of real life operating conditions, where the primary objective is to make further technical improvements. The development of commercially usable prototypes and pilots is included when it's necessarily the final commercial product, because it may be too expensive to create this just for prototyping and piloting. I think that's quite key to this competition, to be aware of that definition. So to be compliant with state aid, we do require match funding. And also this ties into our objective of securing private investment and demonstrating the commercial viability. Match funding intensities depend on what your entity is, what your company organization is. I will go into these intensities into the next slide. We will go a bit further depth of what makes up a small enterprise, a medium enterprise, a large enterprise. But as an overview, match funding cannot include funding that is attributed to other UK public bodies, government departments, and this also includes other member states funding. However, I should note that EU central funding is permitted within this match funding. The maximum per undertaking as project partner that is eligible is 15 million euros. This is obviously subject to the conversion rate on the day of issue. We will have to transfer that into GBP. Then I do need to cover the fact that we may actually award less than what you've bid for. This may be less than the maximum limit of the state aid as well. We do hold that right. And project costs need to comply with the GBA, that's the General Block Exemption Regulations, definition of eligible project costs. Again, another thrilling read of what those definitions are. We do have those also in our competition guidance to reference there, but to cover what that might look like, what those eligible costs are, they are overheads and operating expenses, their personnel costs for the lifetime of the project, their patents and licenses, and then also buildings and land, instruments and equipment required to deliver this project. If they're not used for the whole lifetime of the project, we will need to see you factoring in the depreciation costs there as well. But there is further information here on the competition guidance and online in the GBA. I also do need to cover how much one entity within a consortium can hold. The eligible project costs for one project partner cannot exceed 70% of the total project cost. So this actually ties into the 15 million euro question as well. What are the maximum amounts each project partner can hold? And also, if you're a research organization or a knowledge dissemination body and you're part of this consortium, you must bear more than 10% of the costs. all quite technical. I appreciate that. We do have these all out in the guidance too. So let's talk about the intensities quickly. So good news is that part of our objectives is knowledge dissemination. So that automatically puts us into the results of the project are widely disseminated bracket, which allows us to have higher intensities, and these are the ones that are shown here. Without the dissemination, you are actually entitled to less grant and grant funding. So the way that we've set up this project enables us to provide more grant funding. It's dependent on what your enterprise is. A small enterprise is classified as a company which is less than 50 people with a turnover or balance sheet of less than 10 million euros. For a medium enterprise, you are 51 to 250 with a balance sheet of 43 million euros and a turnover of, or less, turnover of less than 50 million euros, and larger is all and above. What does that mean in intensive funding? So we can give you up to 60% of your total project costs in grant funding, and then the remaining 40% you need to find from match funding. And that's the same goes for the medium and the large there. If you're a university or a research organization, you can receive the full funding. However, you cannot perform any economic activities. And so this may impact your according to the rest of the assessment criteria. What do we mean by widely disseminate as well? This means publishing, doing publications, presenting at conferences, contributing to open resources. One such example of wide dissemination is actually the feasibility studies who are going to present here later on. That's activity which is part of dissemination. So let's go back to the whole assessment process. You put in your proposal, then we check you against the eligibility criteria, and you can receive a pass or fail here. If you do pass, that's when you move into the assessment criteria assessment period, where you'll be assessed by at least 4 assessors independently. You must score 40% against each criterion, with a total minimum weighted score of 60% to be eligible for the funding. All of the applications will then go through the moderation panel, where an overall score will be determined, and an applications ranking list will also be pulled together. We will then notify you of the outcome, as we said, in June. Our intended date is June. If you're unsuccessful, no funding. If you are successful, this is when we determine the funding allocation. As I mentioned earlier, your individual project allocation may be less than what you bid for. And we also do hold back the right to fund lower scoring projects to broaden the technology scope of successful applicants. And again, I have to emphasize, we may allocate less than the total competition budget as well. Okay, so let's look at the eligibility criteria and the assessment criteria in a bit further depth. So the eligibility criteria, we touched on these briefly in Sally's talk, but not in too much depth. So eligibility criteria, I've categorized them sort of into 10 here. You can go onto the competition guidance and they go into much more detail there. So first of all, we're looking at technology readiness level of a minimum of 6. This is classified as the prototype system having been verified. We cannot support early stage research, so that's 5 or below, or technology development, again, technology readiness level 5 or below. And we cannot support technology readiness level work at TRL 9 as well. Second, we're looking at for projects which can be classified as experimental development. We've covered what that meant earlier. You can go back and listen to how I described it, or again, go to the thrilling document that GBA is. Then thirdly, for the deployment, if you have widely deployed this or commercially deployed this, this will not, by this I mean the technology which you're bringing in as a proposal, you will not be eligible. We will be looking for storage, which is an order of well, not an order, more than the 10 megawatts baseline that we've stated in our competition guidance, with previously deployed. Number 4, it cannot be conventional energy storage. Sally, again, briefly touched on this in the Q&A. What do we mean by conventional energy storage? We mean the widely deployed, the commercially deployed energy storage, such as traditional conventional pumped hydro and lithium-ion batteries, traditional conventional ones. There are some innovations in the field, such as solid-state lithium-ion, which would technically be eligible because they aren't widely commercially deployed at this current point. But we should also state, I'm going to re-emphasize what Sally said, of what TRL level it currently is at, your technology. 5, the output. We've covered this quite a bit now. It cannot be a thermal output for the electrical energy storage. Power to X, we do not determine what the output, the end use is, but for the electrical energy storage category, it does need to be electricity in, electricity out. Number 6, you cannot have received previous funding for similar scale projects. We expect to see an order of magnitude larger than what you have previously received funding for. Number 7, additionality. We want to see why this public funding for the proposal that you've submitted is essential to your solution. What would happen without this funding? Why wouldn't the proposal be successful? The project, even. Number 8, the project location. Again, we've covered this, UK-based. That means that the majority of project spend needs to occur in the UK. Number 9, cost eligibility. Again, this is the eligible cost definition within GBA. And number 10, the declarations and mandatory exclusion grounds that we've covered within the application forms and competition guidance annexes. So if you're successful with the eligibility criteria, you pass, they're all pass or fail there. You move into the assessment criteria, the assessment of the application. We have 6 different criteria that we're going to assess you again. As you can see, the weighting is 15% against 4 of those, with 20% weighting against project delivery and project financing. This again draws back to our feasibility and awareness that these are quite tight timescales, and also the objective of securing private investment within the UK. So I'm going to briefly go through these so that, to let you know what we're really looking for. Again, this is all in the assessment guidance, the competition guidance. So number 1, the innovative technology demonstration, performance improvement and cost reduction. We've stated that highest marks will go to those who have looked at the levelized cost of storage and taking into account the performance, life cycle costs and other technology benefits. We're also looking for the level of innovation here. What makes your project so innovative? Number 2, the energy system benefits to be secured by this technology type. This is where we're looking at it a bit more holistically, not just the energy system benefits, but also the economic benefits and the impact on greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. We are interested in seeing the total impact here. We'll also be looking at the energy cost savings, and we're really looking at how this helps the UK goal of decarbonisation and to deploy more renewables. Number 3, market potential. What are your plans for further commercialisation? We really want to see some robust plans there and what exploitation routes you're looking at. And we're also interested in your awareness of the market, and we're going to look for the greatest potential market uptake here. Number 4, project delivery. This is one of the weightier criteria. What we'd expect to see are some real feasible, realistic project plans and risk management processes, as well as strategies around data collection. And because of the timelines, again, some experience of delivering projects like this in the past, some proof of previous punchy projects. And also we'd look at what the dependencies are there. Are there any external dependencies? They'll obviously be taken into consideration, but internal dependencies that you could control. Number 5, project financing. This is where we're looking at what match funding you've leveraged. More match funding leveraged is great news, and also the additionality and the robustness of your financial plans. Number 6, the final one, is the contribution to the sector capacity building and knowledge dissemination. This really focuses on your knowledge dissemination plans. We want to see some clear plans there for you to share lessons learned from this project and help build the wider sector, not just the industry, the supporting sectors, as well as the supply chain. So we'll mark all of these against a scoring guidance matrices here. We're really looking at evidence. We want to see some evidence behind your statements. Again, emphasize that you're required to score a minimum of 40% against each criteria and a total minimum of 60% weighting to be eligible for funding. So finally, if you're successful through all that, you come to the grant offer letter and grant agreement stage. The notification of outcome to all proposals will be released in June, intended dates in June, which would then, if you are successful, cover a period of due diligence and also a period for clarification. If you're successful, you may have some queries when drawing up the final formal project milestone plans and discuss any of the grant offer conditions. There is a template, a draft grant agreement in the competition guidance. Please do not alter these in your submission. This will make your submission null and void. There is an opportunity to discuss these at this point. But you should know that this is the standardized Cabinet Office grant agreement that's used widely. There is an amendment to ensure that the intellectual property remains with the project teams rather than being held by the funding body, i.e. us. So that will remain, the project teams will hold the IP rights there. And during this period, this is when we will aim to release all of the feedback. We do hold up until 2 months. We do have up until after the notification of outcome to release the feedback, but we do aim to release it in the month of June. So thank you. Sorry for the quite dry, systematic approach through that, but it is good to cover it. Any further questions?
Yeah, Josh Newbury, OPS Design. A question about the thinking behind choosing development of prototype rather than proof of concept, given the indeterminate time requirement for storage and the fact that the money would go a lot further if you were to look further down the scale.
Sally, you were here in the, do you want to?
So we've run different programs at different times. And within this current spending review period, we've run, in fact, projects we have running at the moment are more aimed at proof of concepts, and the cost reduction projects are at that earlier stage. We've run demonstration projects also at smaller scale than this in the past. So we have a lot of, sort of my discussion, and Chloe also said, we have a lot of feedback in terms of, well, yes, there are technologies that would work if only they were bigger, if only they were really able to demonstrate at this larger scale. So we think that there are opportunities and there are technologies there that can demonstrate at this stage. It is not going to be a hugely wide field. We know that. And I should also add that this year we have a spending review. So we are at the moment putting together ideas that will go to Treasury about future potential innovation programme and innovation support from government. So I'll also take this opportunity to say, if you have ideas and thoughts about where you think future innovation support would be usefully directed and why it is needed at that particular area, then please use that the Smart Innovation email address again to kind of take that idea forward.
Okay, thank you. I mean, of course, given the scale of the 40 billion, I think you said, in terms of the value to the economy, we should really be looking at everything possible at this stage. So
yes.
I hope that in due course you'll be looking at the full TRL range.
Yeah, so I think definitely. So we have done programs at different ranges, and that's something we continue to look at. I think from the policy point of view, and as Nick probably emphasised today, we've been very much focused on energy storage. The policy document that helps to guide our thinking in this area is smart systems and flexibility. As Nick has said, flexibility can come from a range of different sources, and that's sort of hence we have that holistic approach, which also tends to steer us away from very specific targets at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I'd also quickly add that these were based off the feasibility study projects that we did run, which completed at the end of beginning of last year. We have scoped them out to see how feasible a project of this kind and how necessary it is. Yeah, we have looked at the proof of concept and come on to this.
Hi again. Sorry if I misunderstood, but you said that if a company wants to put more than one application, do they need to be in different applications, say power to power, and then has to be power to X, or can they be both in the same?
So if you are to put in multiple applications, we would expect to see different energy storage solutions, energy storage technologies. It wouldn't be we have the same technology and we're going to one application is to put it in one location and another proposal to put it in a different location. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Paul Reynolds from Everose. I was just curious to know in terms of exactly what the storage facility needs to do by December 2021. So you talk about the need for operational piloting, testing and validation. Does that mean that that project needs to provide a certain service, or is it, could you provide some more comment on exactly what that kind of end game when BEIS will say, okay, you've delivered what you said you would deliver, what does that look like?
So the project is looking at, and as you can see throughout our assessment criteria and the objectives, is looking at the deployability and the impacts in the UK energy system. For it to be operational by the end of December 2021, we would expect it to be deployed and operational and impacting the UK energy system. Does that clarify?
Yeah, so I guess if you were looking at providing, say, arbitrage, would you have needed to have made a trade within or sell within the balancing market to allow BEIS to say, yes, I've achieved that aim? Or could you have the capability to do it but not actually have done it?
I'm going to use Sally's, I'm going to need to think on that and clarify a bit further. But as a starter, we'd expect, yes, for it to be functional, ready to sell, ready to complete the arbitrage. Question at the back.
Morning all, Christopher Jackson from Advanced Infrastructure. Thanks very much for today. So sketching out the scale of this project, it's something of the order of £14 million, with about 50% funding and 50% from the private sector. I haven't heard today, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're looking at in terms of who's hosting this this particular project, what relationships there are with the DNO, who would probably have to be involved in the connection of the devices, and also how you will handle the business cases in which these projects sit, which would probably have to generate some ongoing revenues if a lot of the companies here were able to commit their match funding revenues. So could you talk about how you see the context of these projects existing in the commercial world? And just to recap those elements, the hosting, where the site sits, the relationships with the DNOs and the services that the chap from Ever has mentioned, and how ongoing revenue streams are handled, probably with reference to how it differs from standard Innovate UK processes.
So we're aware that technologies will have different commercial commercial models, different business models to make them viable and feasible. So we aren't dictating what those relationships should be. We will look for you to address that in the applications, and that's where we will compare and see the total economic benefits and the total energy system benefits there. So is there anything you'd like to add?
Only just to repeat something that Chloe mentioned in her presentation, in terms of the EU state aid funding, that we fully expect that these projects will need to generate commercial revenue going forwards in order to help them be viable and to help to pull in the private sector funding, and that's entirely legitimate for those projects to be pulling in commercial revenue.
Yeah. It's permitted to have returns during the proposal and afterwards. Yeah, we're looking to become for this technology to become commercial.
Okay, questions from the webcast.
Nick Stapley from Logan Energy. For power to X projects, will development of the use of that X be eligible for funding or just the production?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Will, for power to X projects, will development of the use of that X be eligible for funding or just the production? I guess they are referring to the use of X, like in transport, they have mentioned end use of ammonia or development of fuel cell trucks.
I'm not sure if I entirely understand the question. Apologies to Nick on the webcast. If he does want to send me an email, I'm happy to cover that again, but I'll try and answer it to what I understand. The funding is for the facility, the technology. It is not for the funding for you to then how do you deploy it. It's more for you to build it and get it operational rather than the connection. If I haven't answered that correctly, please do answer me on, send me an email and I can then publish the clarification question for all as well.
Okay. The chat.
Hi there, Michael Harper from Lockheed Martin. So we're a technology supplier of flow battery technology. And the question is, are we only allowed to do one application in one consortium? Or are we allowed to look at several applications because of the technology? And my thoughts are around, we could do a battery plus solar, a battery plus wind, a battery plus some other proposal with different consortium with different developers.
Sally, feel free to come in and yeah, that's what I was going to say. Was yes, that is permitted. They are different technology applications there.
Sorry, just to recap, can you just define the TRL level again that you'd accept? Because it was for instance, if you'd run the project, I don't know, say 1 megawatt in your lab, is that kind of what you'd say? Well, if you run a 1 megawatt project, therefore it could scale to 50, or is there no criteria based on previous megawatts tested in a lab?
So there is, I will cover it here, but there is detailed further advice in the annexes of the competition guidance for TRL. We are specifically looking at 6 and above. 6 is the classification of prototype system verified. We appreciate that something at this scale will be hard to verify a prototype at this scale. As we said in the definition of experimental development within state aid, you may need to necessarily build a commercially viable prototype. So in the instance that you've described there, we would need to see proof of how you could scale it up, not necessarily a prototype of its in its own right.
Doesn't matter what size it is of the lab, as long as I can prove it can just scale easily,
Yes.
It's fine. Sorry.
I think you would pass eligibility if you were fall strictly within the TRL 6 definition. I think when you came to showing your project deliverability and also in terms of getting confidence potentially from financial investors, then that is going to be a more difficult proposition to be able to provide robust evidence that you will be able to move to that scale by the end of the project.
But I won't be restricted on the fact that I have got 1 megawatt tested at the moment.
No, because we've done it on the TRL levels. Yeah, very yes, explicitly.
Thanks.
Graham Ludlow, Energy Matrix. I just wanted to clarify my understanding on eligible costs and what would be fully covered and what you'd need to depreciate. So my understanding at the moment would be if you're ordering materials to build the asset, however long lasting that asset would be, you could expense the full cost. If you're getting in instruments and equipment to construct it, you would need to depreciate those. What about components in the middle, like inverters and things, which may last longer than the couple of years? Would they need to be depreciated? And is that general understanding on the other items correct as well?
I think, yes, that it is, they would have to have a factor in of depreciation because they'd be in use longer than just the project, which is defined until the end of December 2021. Yeah, and your other understanding is correct.
Thanks.
Okay, webcast.
Graham Booth from Doosan. How will Energy Systems Catapult or Ofgem support this call? They are both key to successful adoption of any technology that these call will ultimately propose.
How will, was the question that how will Ofgem?
How will Energy Systems Catapult or Ofgem support this call?
So we are in constant conversation with Ofgem about the policies as we develop them. This is some of the work that my colleague Nick Herbert conducts with his team. With the Catapult systems, they are welcome to bid in as part of the consortium. Do feel free to contact them and discuss with them. I see a hand going up in the corner.
Can they be the project lead, or does it have to be a business?
It needs to be a private entity. Yeah.
Any other questions? No. Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Oh, there's one more.
One more on webcast.
So sorry, I'm just trying to find the name of the person. So Aaron Fike, you ask about GHG reduction in the UK. Do you have your own analysis based on round trip efficiency? Two storage technologies with the same performance will have the same impact. The impact on the UK grid is much greater studied than may be the intent. Any thoughts there?
That's something we'll have to go and think about a bit further. We do have a set of technical experts who will be working on the analysis of these applications, and they do actually sit within Sally and I's wider directorate, the Science and Innovation for Climate and Energy team in BASE, who are constantly answering and thinking about questions like this. Yeah.
Tony Roscolini, Newcastle University again. Is there any benefit in this competition for the IP to be owned and by the UK, or is that? I didn't notice whether that came out in terms of the assessment criteria, and then who's actually involved in the assessment?
Okay. So firstly, the IP question. As we said, the IP would be held by the project teams. There's the question about whether it would be benefit for the UK to hold it. However, this we are keen to exploit it and commercially develop it as rapidly as possible so that we can expedite our decarbonisation route. Therefore, that's why we see the benefit in it remaining with the project teams. With the assessment, we have a panel of at least 4 assessors. 2 will be independent and 2 will be BASE technical advisors.
Okay, any, yeah, one last.
Still a further question to clarify, that's about, you answered the question that's power to heat, that's not eligible. Power to electricity in between, if that's thermal energy storage, that's a tick. and from heat to electricity, that's not eligible. My question is, compressed air, if you combine that with CCGT, you use electricity, you generate less electricity, use that compress the gas, and that's tick. So my question is, for example, if that's the thermal power generation, you just take more steam, bleed away, and you store that, regenerate the steam, and put it back to be the electricity. Virtually, that's less power generation, and eventually you put back electricity. Is this eligible or not?
Oh goodness, I need to see that written out, I think. It's the hard and fast that you cannot have heat as the input, and you cannot have heat in the electrical energy storage system as the output. What you do in the middle with the steam, that's fine. That's eligible. That is allowed. It may be good to quickly discuss that afterwards as well to make sure that I've understood your question properly.
Any other last questions? Okay, thank you very much, Chloe.
Thank you.
Let's get my notes. Okay, so we're a little bit, I'll put that down. We're a little bit ahead of schedule now, but not too far off lunchtime. So first thing I wanted to say was you've seen a lot of information this morning, but all of the slides that you've seen will be circulated to you after the event, along with a link to the recording that's being made. So you'll have plenty of time to look back through that and get any other clarification questions into Bays before the deadline. In terms of other networking activities that we're going to do for the rest of the day, you were sent a give-get card when you had place confirmed. And we only have one lonely one on the networking wall at the moment, but there are lots of blank ones. So to make the most of the networking activity today, if you'd like to fill one of those in and pop it up on the networking wall, it's a really effective way of finding out who's in the room, what skills they have to offer and what they're looking for. But we'll use that information after the event to be able to matchmake people. So it is really useful to us as well to be able to find new partners once we leave the room today. So please do fill that in. You can get blank ones from Natasha on the welcome desk where you came in. The other thing as well, if you booked meetings through the Meeting Mojo system, the original agenda had a mid-morning break, and some of you had booked meetings during that mid-morning break. Natasha's rescheduled those. So if you go back to Natasha, she'll be able to tell you when and where you meet those people for those Meeting Mojo meetings. And then lastly, as I said before, if you'd like to have a 10-minute session with Bays to talk through your project idea, go over any last questions that you didn't really understand this morning, then you can book these one-to-one sessions. Again, back to Natasha, she's going to be busy. You can book a 10-minute slot with either Chloe or Sally, and also Martin will be covering some of the questions, some of what you've seen this morning. So if you have any, you just want to discuss your idea, make sure it is in scope. I'd recommend that. You can book those slots with Natasha. There'll be half an hour. The last half an hour of lunch break will be one-to-ones, and then another half an hour at the end of the day. So there's plenty of time for you to chat to those. And I think that's it. So we are finishing a little bit early, but there's tea and coffee downstairs, so you can start off with a drink and a chat, and then lunch will be served at 12 o'clock, and we'll be back in the room again at 1 o'clock. Same goes for the people online. Please come and join us again at 1 o'clock, and you'll see some presentations about the type of projects that have been funded in the past. It might give you an idea of where to go. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and welcome back to the webcast viewers. So for this afternoon, well, it is this afternoon. For this afternoon, we're now going to, it's going to be the audience's turn to get up here and present. So we're going to start off with two case study speakers. As I said this morning, these two projects were funded by Bays in the feasibility study part of this particular programme on storage at scale. So we thought it'd be a good example of the type of thing that we were looking for the demonstration as well, but obviously at a much greater scale. And the first person that's going to be speaking to you is Nick Kitchen from Cumulus Energy Storage.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great, okay. So, what we're talking to you about this afternoon is the feasibility study that we did at a place called, well, it's called the Fisherstown Energy Park, literally in the middle of Ireland. I'm going to talk you through the scope of the project, as well as, why did we decide to do this in Ireland, etc. So that's the list of subject areas that we're going to cover. So let me walk through this. So why did we decide to do the feasibility study in Ireland? A number of different reasons. Firstly, because Ireland has committed to have 16% of its all energy consumed to be renewable by 2020. That means that 40% of that electricity, on average, needs to be renewable, and most of that comes from wind. So there's a specific issue with the wind side of things that I'll highlight in the next couple of slides. Secondly, the Irish wind generation is up to 90%, well, basically it is 90% of the total renewables generation in Ireland. That's taken the 2018 figures. I'll give you this breakdown on the next slide or so. They've also recently moved from what's called DS3 to include something called ISEM, the Integrated Single Electricity Market in Ireland. There are much longer duration services in the ISEM market compared to the typically ancillary services for DS3, so which makes it much more suitable for our chemistry. And that started on the 1st of October 2018. So there's a lot of learning going on at the moment as to the implications of that for storage generally across Ireland. We also happen to be invited by one of the developers in Ireland to use or put our rechargeable copper zinc system into their premises because they see the benefit of us and our particular characteristics for the Irish electricity market. So there's a specific requirement for us to be in Ireland to satisfy market needs. That's why he's suggesting us, or one of the reasons he's suggesting us to be the technology provider rather than, say, lithium ion as an alternative. We also happen, on this particular site, this energy park, there also happens to be a grid connection. There's a building available. So lots of facilities that we would otherwise have to spend significant capex on are already in place. Clearly, from the GB point of view, there are interconnectors between Ireland and the UK, so you could argue that there's a link between Ireland, literally, physically, in that sense. And for a UK PLC, there's a magnificent export opportunity here by delivering this. It's a circa $120 million project. It's a serious size application. So just to talk about Ireland again, in terms of the electricity mix, you can see most of it's gas, but the renewables bit there, circa 32% or so. And there's also a little bit of peat and a little bit of coal. Note the peat bit for a slide or two later. You can see most of that renewables is wind. And the implication of that is when you look at the, hopefully we can get to the next slide. Why is it frozen? Is that what it is? Okay, too much data on it already. Okay, so you can see from this that the percentage mix, the percentage of the wind as a percentage of the overall electricity generation in any 15 minutes can be typically 60% of the total generation. So this is a particular problem for Ireland. And as a consequence of that, and because they want to drive this up to 40% on average, means that this 60%, 65% we're currently talking about is likely to get to 70 to 75% of the total electricity generated in any 1 quarter-hour period. So this is a very, very dynamic scenario. There's a real need for energy storage in Ireland. So these are the reasons why we decided to do it in Ireland. Now, whereabouts are we talking about? Fisherstown Energy Park, it's at a place called in County Longford in Ireland. And if you look at the location there, it is literally right in the middle of Ireland. I'm told there are another 3 locations in Ireland that could be a similar scale to the one I'm going to talk to you about in a second, but that's where it is, or where it's going to be, I'm hoping. Now, the Fisherstown Energy Park itself is roughly 46 acres in size. It's planned to have about 25 megawatts of solar PV around the perimeter, to have a 3 megawatt AD plant on it, circa 30 megawatt data center on site. It's got a grid connection in the top left-hand corner. I can't point at it, but top left-hand corner, there's the grid connection, the substations there. And that building that you can see with lots of white oblongs in it, that's representative of our energy storage. That building's about 330,000 square feet in terms of floor area. And our storage is potentially going to fill most of that area. So the project about is actually in 3 phases. There's an initial 1 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour system to go in first, followed on by the 60 megawatt hour system. That's what we did for the feasibility study. So 15 megawatt, 60 megawatt hour system. So all the costs I'm going to talk to you about are based on that scale of installation. And then once we've done that, then the plan is to take that up to, with modifications to the substation, take it up to 100 megawatt, 400 megawatt hour system, which I think is fair to say will be one of the largest batteries in Europe by that point in time. And what we did was we looked at all those various things you can see under there. I won't go through every single one of them, but you can see the scope of the project that we looked at there. But just to now indicate a little bit more about why Cumulus, why rechargeable copper zinc as opposed to lithium ion, for example. Well, our system is incredibly simple. You can, I hope, see on the left-hand side of that sketch a copper electrode, on the left-hand side a zinc electrode, and there's a membrane in the middle. In between the membrane and the electrodes is a liquid electrolyte. And essentially what happens is every time you charge the battery, the copper goes into solution and zinc electrowinds onto the zinc electrode. Every time we discharge, the same thing happens in reverse. So zinc goes into solution and copper electrowinds onto the copper electrode. Every time we do a complete cycle, we're actually refreshing our electrodes. So we don't see the same capacity you see with lithium ion, for example, or even lead acid, some of the other battery technologies. We've effectively got 2 electrowinning plants back to back, separated by a membrane. And all you have to do to get more storage is to literally make, and it's very much an automotive-driven cost structure to this, make more cells, put them in series, and the same current goes through each one of those. So that's the basic structure. It's really, really simple. Series of different USPs. Again, I'm not going to go through them individually, but suffice it to say it's safe, reliable, and lowest projected levelized cost of storage. And the LCOS figures I'm using here are using the Lazard's item level 3 calculations. Now, just to complement or show you how we differentiate from lithium, if you look at this sort of octagonal spider diagram, the dotted line is the lithium characteristics, and the solid line are the copper zinc characteristics. We literally are on opposite sides of the spectrum as far as this is concerned. So as I said before, we're complementing, not competing with lithium ion. This is a much longer duration storage, but we have the ability to also take part in the ancillary services market as well, because it's an aqueous battery and a very rapid response time. We're also able to do circa 10,000 cycles and 99.5% recyclability. So hopefully we're ticking all the boxes that we need to tick for UK PLC. In terms of costs, here's an indication of the materials cost and how those are projected to go down underneath lithium ion in the very near future. And clearly a project like this would help facilitate that drop in costs very, very quickly. And just again to show you the Lazard's calculation, the LCOS3, what I hope you can see on here is the yellow line in each of those use case studies is effectively our pilot line production, what we call generation 1, and the LCOS that pops out from that. And then the alto, the red line, is the LCOS figures that we're anticipating getting when we get to full scale production, circa 500 megawatt hours a year. So this is the sort of area that we're targeting in terms of our LCOS figures. And I hope you can see from that we are already less than lithium in terms of projections. We're certainly the bottom end of the flow battery spectrum, and further cost reductions will apply because this is before we go down the experience curve of every doubling of numbers of cells made means obviously we drop our unit production costs accordingly. In terms of value propositions, obviously asset deferral, ancillary services, all 3 of those apply depending on the scenario that we're in. In Ireland, we've got both, as I said before, DS3 and ISEM, and here are some examples of some of the services that we can potentially tap into. And there is a 100 megawatt peak burning power station at Loughrea, which is pretty close to our potential site at Fisherstown. If that closes, then there'll be a major incentive for us to get up and running there as well. So again, just to indicate the level of support, the scope of support from government level right the way across the pitch, from EirGrid, obviously BEIS, thank you very much, Sally, and the rest of the BEIS team. So it is, it's proved to be a really good project, actually, to be honest. And the key results, which are the acid test at the end of the day, in a pessimistic scenario, we're anticipating about 19% IRR. In an optimistic scenario, it's more like 30. I can't think of that many projects that can actually achieve those kinds of IRRs, certainly from an energy storage point of view. There's a cost figure for you in terms of CapEx for the complete system installed, not just our battery, not just cells, not just at system level, the complete project. We do have to do some work on the electrical network to improve it for the 15 megawatt connection, but environmentally, no significant impacts. And that's it. Thank you. Right.
Time for a quick question, if anybody has a question.
Hello. With high depth of discharge, do you defigure your anode and cathode? Is there a problem with that over long term?
No, because as I said, every time we do a complete cycle, the whole system's designed to be high depth of discharge.
Yeah, but if there's a flaw in it, then you could end up with it being the wrong shape inside there.
It's not what we've seen so far.
You haven't seen it. How much testing have you got?
We've done about 3,000 cycles.
Okay.
And one question on the webcast.
Right.
Okay, so the question is, can gas turbine be used to generate electricity for energy storage?
Kind of gas turbine?
Yeah.
That's not related to this.
Why am I being asked
that
that question?
I asked the person on the line, but this is the question for this.
Not to worry. Okay, thank you very much, Nick.
There was one more question, I think.
Was there some? Oh.
Yeah.
Thomas Chappell from Whirlwind Renewables. I was just interested to look at in the graph you had at the end, which had, I think, project lifetime years versus IRR. Could you just explain what that's telling us? I didn't quite follow it.
Basically, the longer the project duration, obviously the better the IRR. That's essentially what that's saying. So if the IRR is less than 0, then obviously you need a project that's longer duration than that before you start getting a positive IRR in the system. So you'd need if you've got 4 years or thereabouts contracts, you'd need to be able to say, or would like ideally to be able to say, that towards the end of that 4-year period, you're able to renew those contracts or extend those contracts. So there's a little bit of risk associated with that, to be fair.
Right, so it's about contract length, really, and if you've got, if you're getting up to 20-year contracts, then that's
so the lifetime of the technology is 20 years plus when we get to the sort of second, third generation, etc. So if the contracts are there for at least 4 years, you're going to get into positive NPV territory and positive IRR territory, and then the rest is icing on the cake.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Okay, and next up, our next case study speaker is John Newton, who's going to tell you about the ITM Power project.
First challenge is to make this work. Oh, the arrows all. Thank you, BEIS. Thank you, Sally, and the team. Briefly, then, I'm going to talk to you about the feasibility study which ITM did, essentially I did, which was looking at the capacity for power to gas in the UK. Power to gas, read power to X. So I'm going to contextualize it in work that's been going on elsewhere, not funded directly by BEIS, but funded by Ofgem, which is the High Deploy project, because essentially the feasibility study was predicated by the eternal question about how much gas can you put into the UK gas network, but that question was answered quite successfully shortly after the feasibility closed. I'm going to talk briefly about the storage capacity in the gas network. A lot of people don't realise just how much energy is stored in our gas network. So representing a giant battery for the UK, but also, depending on usage, an enormous sink into which surplus power can be converted to energy and stored. Briefly going to talk about our technology roadmap, how it dovetailed nicely with some of the assumptions arising from the feasibility study, results and the recommendations, and just a brief glimpse at what's possible with enough support. Okay, so Power to X, as Sally so rightly said, hydrogen is a connecting technology. You can take electricity, aka power, you can separate water into its two constituent parts, and you can do a number of things with that hydrogen, effectively storing the energy and moving it across vectors into other areas. So from the top, fuel for vehicles. Hydrogen buses operate here in London. We have a fleet of hydrogen refueling stations which we're slowly rolling out, one of which sits at MPL. I was talking to an MPL colleague before. So there you're looking at decarbonisation at the point of use. If you look at the use of energy in the UK, the second highest use is for transportation, and it's now starting to be seen as attractive for HGVs as well as buses, which are one of our major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. Power to gas heat. So essentially you put hydrogen into the gas network, it gets used in people's condensing boilers and other uses for methane, and it decarbonises that as well as providing storage from what cannot be stored on the electricity network. Other applications, chemical industry, refineries, methanol, synthetic methane, ammonia. 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions are produced by the ammonia producing industries, which currently take a mixture of hydrocarbons, coal, oil and gas, and they turn it into hydrogen for producing ammonia. Ammonia is used for everything from replacements for CFCs and refrigerants, but more importantly, it's an integral part of sustaining growth by producing fertilizers. All of these use hydrogen, and all of these are potential uses for it. If you take surplus or constrained renewable energy, or even brown or grey energy from other conventional sources, because it does exist, you can store that power as energy and use it elsewhere. Okay, power to gas. Some of you may be aware that there's a lot of talk and a lot of work being done by the UK gas distribution network operators at future scenarios, and many of those are revolving around 100% hydrogen. So Cadent, what used to be National Grid Gas Distribution, and Northern Gas Networks both have a number of very high profile projects which are running, and it's talking about transitioning away from fossil fuel to hydrogen. That is essentially predicated by having support both from government and industry to have a cost-effective development of carbon capture and storage. That's a great ambition. I worked in the power industry for 20 years, and I think it's something the UK should be looking at. But it's still a long way off, and it requires a lot of money and a lot of investment. So that's the future. We can get onto that journey now by using power to gas technology, using hydrogen sourced from electrolysis. Fundamentally, it's an energy storage medium. I will repeat that until I'm saying it. Power to energy is important. It also provides a means of sustaining the argument in favour of intermittent renewable generation. So this is power production at the times where supply and demand are frequently disconnected by hours, by seconds, minutes, hours, and sometimes even days and weeks. I want to use this up to talk about high deploy. When we did the feasibility study, the first stage of high deploy, which is an Ofgem funded programme under the Gas Network Innovation Competition Scheme, hadn't proven its first hurdle, which was to prove to the Health and Safety Executive that adding 20% hydrogen into an isolated private network at Keele University was safe. Because that is the first question you have to answer about doing anything in terms of change within the gas networks. High deploy produced the answer to that first question in April, when I think the feasibility study closed at the end of January. And at the time of writing the feasibility study, we were talking about the potential to store energy in hydrogen in the gas network had different levels of functionality and capability, many of which were predicated by the the legislation on hydrogen gas injection. So fortunately, passed that first test, and we'll be embarking on injecting hydrogen into the Kiel gas network sometime this summer. But more importantly, Ofgem have since then funded HyDeploy 2, which will be announced officially in about a month or so for a big public launch. And there we'll be taking the technology, the power to gas technology from Kiel University, and demonstrating it elsewhere on the UK gas networks, one in Cadence area and one in Northern Gas Networks area. So it kind of, we knew what the answer was going to be, or at least we hoped we knew what the answer was. And then shortly after completing the feasibility study, we got the tick in that box. So back to the difference between the electricity and the gas networks. This is Ofgem data. They publish this twice a year, spring and winter, talking about how much energy is transported through both the electricity network and the gas network. And you can see the difference in size between what we transport over the wires and the energy that's moved around the UK in the gas pipes. That's both transmission and distribution. So this is support and evidence that power to gas, as part of the power to X portfolio, we've got an enormous capacity to store energy currently in the ground, paid for, and continue to being upgraded by the gas network operators as part of the fee that you and I pay through our gas bills. So how do we do it? We take water, electricity, and we produce hydrogen. Part of the scalability is many of the questions and some of the things that have been talked about today about how we scale low technology readiness levels up that ladder and to demonstrate them at high capacity and high usage. So we've been doing this at ITM with the support from various private and public sector organisations. We receive an enormous amount of funding and support, both from BEIS and from Innovate UK to reach this. So that in itself is a lesson for early stage technology developers. The opportunity to utilise funding that's available from such organisations is one that everybody really has to recognise and get on board with. So we've taken that technology, we started a long time ago, I think it's over 10 years now, and we've got it to a larger system. We've got a modular scalable technology, and we applied that thinking to how we analyse the data in the feasibility study. So simply, if you've got a 2 megawatt electrolyser, and I 2 megawatts as being the electrical load, so that represents what is effectively a demand side load onto the network to absorb surplus spikes in the electricity supply scheme. And we gang these up and we make them larger. So what we have here is effectively 5 2 megawatt modules representing 10 megawatts electrical demand side load in totality. So the feasibility study, when the opportunity came up, I thought about this in not so much an abstract way, but a logical way. I knew where Northern Gas Networks gas network was. It was in the north of England, on the eastern side of the UK, pretty much South Yorkshire all the way up to the border with Scotland. I also recognised that that was almost a duplicate for Northern Power Grid, the electrical distribution network operator for the same area. And the first question I asked was, where does Northern Power Grid have problems in its network? And where does Northern Gas Networks have the capacity to inject varying amounts of hydrogen into their gas network? And then essentially came up with a long list of opportunities that needed some detailed study. Engaging with Northern Power Grid, they said, we've got some big constraints, but if you could provide us with a demand side load almost anywhere as a distribution network, we feel that there's value in having that because we can move electricity around within certain kV constraints, but having a demand side load is useful. Next was then to prioritize the locations, so to take the long list and turn it into a short list, and use the resources available in Northern Gas Networks to understand whereabouts within their network they are moving gases and to which customers they are moving it, predominantly domestic or predominantly industrial and commercial and large industrial users. Yes, we use and rely heavily on heat in our homes for providing our hot water and for cooking, but it's an integral part of the UK industry landscape for producing heat for a variety of industrial purposes. Everything from making bricks, pottery, cement, just at an industrial scale, everybody uses heat. We also, during the feasibility study, looked at what were the cross-sector export opportunities. Whilst we didn't spend a lot of time on that, it was useful to do the analysis to say, what's the UK trajectory on decarbonising transport? What are the ambitions moving hydrogen into the market and making it available for hydrogen vehicle refuelling? So at the moment, if you've got a hydrogen car, we've got a filling station in Sheffield, you can use ours, but the next one you reach before you reach Scotland is in Aberdeen. So in the north of England, whether it's east or west, there's a dearth of capacity to test and to promulgate the benefits of hydrogen vehicle refueling. So we looked at what the export opportunities were around there. And then we did some high-level evaluation and estimation of what the power-to-gas demonstration system would cost at a variety of sizes. Using Northern Gas Network's modelling tools and the ability to export that data, it was great. We did an analysis on their 2 local distribution networks, their LDZs, which I showed briefly in the previous picture. And this is an analysis based on a variety of hydrogen schemes, saying at that size, so the number across the top in megawatts, how many electrolyzers at that size could be accommodated on the gas networks based on the gas network flows under a number of scenarios. So one of the things that this feasibility study brought straight to the surface very quickly was the capacity to demonstrate this technology, provided you have all the other things lined up, not least of which is funding, and the ambition of the gas and the electricity networks is vast. We have huge potential, particularly in the north of England, to demonstrate the capacity to inject hydrogen. So you can see the numbers there. Obviously, at small scales of size, there are even more, but what this purpose of this project was looking at large-scale industrial storage. You can see that the capacity to put a power-to-gas plant on the ground is good, to say the least. The outcomes and recommendations, whilst saying here's a huge list, we had to give it some clear and genuine focus. And one of the areas that we identified as having one of the biggest potentials for what would be a very good demonstration of power to gas, with the capacity to export hydrogen, given its proximity to a road network, specifically the A1 that runs outside Newcastle, was the Low Thornley area. Low Thornley is the site of a new incubator, and Andrew from Newcastle University is going to be talking about that in the pitch later. We received an enormous amount of support both from Northern Gas Networks and, more importantly, their Chinese parent company. Not lose sight of the fact that most of the infrastructure in the UK is no longer UK owned, it's owned by a Chinese company, but they're supportive of this. And the Integral facility is seeking to carve a niche for itself to demonstrate not only power to gas, but also pure electricity in, electricity out technologies. You can see there the gas network from Low Thornley, which is only about 15 minutes taxi drive from Newcastle Station, feeds gas to 43 gas customers. It's close to the A1, so there's trans-sector export opportunities there. And we found that the recommendation was that we should embark on a feasibility study, a front-end engineering design study about a large-scale power-to-gas size of at least 10 megawatts. I say the necessity to do a front-end engineering design because a lot of the determining factors for gas are driven by UK gas legislation. We proved with High Deploy that these aren't insurmountable problems, but they do take time. Just to put it in context, are happening already. This is a large 10 megawatt system that's currently under build in Germany. And this is a cross-sector export. It's using the facility to produce hydrogen as both a grid balancer and a load balancer for Europe's second large petroleum refinery. And the hydrogen will go downstream into their gas train because they use something in the order of 200,000 tonnes of hydrogen per annum as part of their distillation process. The end.
That was a little bit past 10 minutes. Because of the time, time. We're not going to do questions if that's okay, John, but please catch up with John afterwards if you want to talk about those projects in more detail. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is the end of the event for the people online. So thank you very much for joining us online. The slides and the recording and a link to the competition information will be sent out to you after the event. So hopefully that'll be useful. And also for everybody that registered and opted to share their details, you'll also get a copy of the delegate list with their emails so that you can get in touch with potential partners. But I hope you enjoyed it today. Thank you.